Welcome, my name is November Lima, and I will be your dean here at the Planeswalker Academy. What is the Planeswalker Academy, you say? Well, the Planeswalker Academy is the academy that focuses on beginners and intermediates, players that just want to improve their game or want to learn something new. I'll be covering a lot of different formats, a lot of different things, and hopefully my knowledge and the knowledge that I've learned from others I can pass along to you. And first off, we are going to focus on drafting. This video will be Draft 101. It's going to focus on just getting you started with drafting. And if you've already played drafts, but whether it's arena or paper, you pretty much always get away with the equal amount of wins as losses, maybe even less wins, then this video is for you. If you feel like you've got a pretty good grasp on drafts, I'd still recommend watching because you never know what you might pick up. That's a great way to improve. So first off, one thing you hear with every draft how-to is the term bread. Bread is an acronym that stands for a couple different things that I will go into. First thing I want to say before you're like, oh my gosh, bread, I've heard this 1,000 times, I'm going to go ahead and click and get away from this video. I just want to say that bread to me is a little misleading because it tries to force certain picks that I don't think are always the best picks. So we're going to cover bread because it is a good thing to keep in mind. However, we're going to get a little deeper into it. So first is bomb. So whenever you're picking, you've got your first pack lined out. You want to look at, is there a bomb? Is there a card that's going to win me the game? And why I say it's misleading is because quite often people will look for a bomb and end up picking a mediocre card. A bomb has to be a card that if your opponent doesn't take care of it, it's going to win you the game. It's going to really make it hard for your opponent to win the game if you have this card on the field. That's a bomb. If you cannot get a bomb that's that quality, but instead you have a removal spell in your pack, that's when you pick removal. So removal is picked really high. If you have a solid removal card in your pack, you really have to have an S tier or an A plus tier bomb in your pack for you to pick that over removal. Removal is key. Removal is so important. You can have a mediocre deck, but as long as you have solid removal and enough of it, you might win the game because you can get rid of your opponent's threats. Your 2/2s will win if your opponent doesn't have threats on the board. So removal is so important, and unless you have an S tier or a really high level bomb, pick removal first. If you have no bombs or removal, try to get a creature with evasion. Evasion meaning that it's hard to block for your opponent. You're both going to have a lot of creatures on the board, maybe not all at the same time, but you're going to have creatures constantly in the game. That's kind of how draft is built. So having some creatures with flying or creatures that do not allow your opponent to block it is going to be huge. Otherwise, you can pick a good aggro card. In the end, you're going to have to bring your opponent's life total down to 0, so that's when you pick your aggro cards. And then last but not least, you got your duds. Your duds are your cards that you will not play. However, if you pick a dud, there's nothing in the pack you want. You're probably towards the end of a first pack, or your color isn't open and you really don't have any good cards to pick at that point. Try to pick a card that can go in your sideboard if you play best of 3, or if you're in paper. If you're like in your local game store drafting, you're going to want a sideboard. So then try to pick something that's at least a hate card like this Crushing Canopy here. If there's not even a card you would put in your sideboard, just go with the highest quality one. If you see, let's say you play Arena, pick the uncommons first so you can fill your vault. If you're playing paper, just pick the card you like. But other than that, that's going to be your order in which you're going to want to pick your cards. Is bomb first, has to be better than the removal that's in the pack by a long shot. Otherwise, pick the removal, then go for the evasion creatures, then just the creatures for the beatdown, and then last but not least, just get the fillers, the duds. So, but like I said, there's more to it. Just like this Nana here knitting, there's just so much more to it than just, hey, grab some needles, grab wool, make it happen. So we're going to talk about the mana cost. Mana cost. We're going to talk about the mana cost. So when you pick a bomb or a great card regardless, even if it's a removal, you want to look at the mana cost. And what I mean by that is not necessarily the amount of mana spent on it, but the types of mana spent on it. So obviously this Tiamat, a 7/7 flyer that can get you a bunch of dragons, that sounds fantastic. But in a limited environment, you're never going to pull off to a white, a blue, a black, a red, and a green. Now, of course, that's an extreme, and I'm sure that somebody that's looking at this video is like, no, I forced Tiamat in limited and made me win games. Power to you, but I would not advise it. So look at the mana cost, make it something that you think will work. Now, Tiamat is an extreme. Now, another good example I have here are like black and white or any two-color card for that matter. A lot of draft formats, it's hard to get past 2 or 3 colors. I often find myself splashing a third color, so playing 2, splashing a third. But that's about as far as you want to go in a lot of formats. Going with 4 colors or 5 colors is almost impossible. So if you pick a card that already has 2 colors, make sure that that card is really by far the best card in the pack. There's nothing else you'd rather like. There's nothing else in other colors that you'd rather like, because if you pick a card with 2 colors, that's quite the commitment. So keep that in mind. Also, cards that have a lot of one color. So it might just be a monocolored card, but if you have to use 2 or 3 of one specific color, know that that's going to be a commitment you make. You like this old growth troll, you can play that in a 2-color deck in limited just fine, because you can probably play it by turn 5 or 6, maybe even 7, and it'll still be good value. Like, it's not constructed, it's a slower format. However, you're not going to play a 3-color deck and include an old growth troll. It's going to be very, very hard to pull off. So those are things that you keep in mind as you're picking these cards. Like, not just how good is the card, but can I cast it, and how likely is it that I will cast it? Are these the colors that I want to play? Then you want to look at curve. So as you're picking your cards, as you get further in your packs, maybe halfway pack 2, especially pack 3, you're just looking to fill your curve and the things that you miss. Am I low on creatures? Like, I've got a couple bombs, I got a lot of removals, but I don't have a lot of little bodies. Do I have nothing but little bodies and I need to like just fill up my late game a little bit? Look at your curve. So this is, by example, a curve of a deck on Arena that I went 7 wins with. The curve is kind of, you'll see that the curve kind of goes like this. That's kind of like your mana cost. So if you think about it, you got your 1 drops, 2 drops, 3 drops, 4 drops, and then you're going to go back down. It's like a little hump that you want to see in your mana cost. And that way you know you have a pretty good curve. So now there's no golden rule to this is the amount of 2 drops, this is the amount of 3 drops. But if you got yourself a little hump, you're probably in pretty good shape. That's an easy way to remember it. So just like here, you see a little bit of a hump. Obviously, this one is a little heavy on the 2 and 3 drops, but you still see a little bit of that hump to where you know you've got a pretty decent curve. After that, you want to look at synergies. So let's say some cards might not be the greatest by themselves, but they have a lot of synergy. So now granted, here the Headless Rider is not the best example, because the Headless Rider is a fantastic card by itself, because it's a 3/1 that replaces itself for 3 mana. However, where this card truly shines is if you have multiple zombies. If you have more non-token zombies, Headless Rider suddenly becomes pretty nuts. So if you have a lot of zombies and you pick a Headless Rider, you might want to prioritize that. Or vice versa, you pick up a Headless Rider and you've got a couple other zombie synergies. Maybe there's a zombie card in the pack that's not nearly as good as some of the other cards, but because you have the synergies, you're going to want to pick up the zombie card. So those are things to consider. Don't go too heavy in synergies, because if you really try to force a synergy or try to force a tribal, you're going to find yourself in trouble. So don't force it too soon unless you have a really good reason. Same with the Sigardian Paladin. Obviously, by itself, it's just a 4/4/4/4, but once you have a lot of +1/+1 counters going on in your deck, it suddenly becomes a really powerful card. So now that we've gotten more into the picking of the cards, you kind of know what to go for, what to aim for. So again, we've got removal, unless you have an S tier bomb, and then you start picking like your creatures that you can actually win the game with if you don't end up drawing your bomb. And you want to have a good curve. So now we're building the deck. So there's a bit of a rule that goes on where you kind of want to pick a certain amount of creatures. So if you look at your deck, so a limited deck is going to be 40 cards. Of those 40 cards, you want to look at about 12 to 17 creatures, with 12 being very little, 17 being a high amount for a creature deck. Anywhere between there is kind of where you're going to be. Again, this is not a golden rule. This is a guideline. So if you find yourself just drafting a banger Izzet deck with only like 5 creatures, more power to you. But this is kind of where you see most draft decks go. Same with the non-creature spells. So most draft decks you'll see somewhere between 6 and 12, 12 being on the high end, 6 being on the low end for creature style decks. So like if you really have an aggressive creature style deck, you're going to find 17 creatures, 6 non-creature spells. Maybe even higher creatures, lower non-creatures. You don't know. And then lands wise, I always recommend 17 lands. That's kind of the base. If you have a decent curve, you're going to have 17 lands. If you have a really fast deck, you might go with 16. If you have a really slow deck or you want landfall triggers, then you might go with 18. But that's about it. You don't want to go too much higher, too much lower. It's not constructed. You don't really mess with that. Really, the only deck that I know that went really low on lands was like the cycling deck in draft because you could obviously cycle a lot for low mana cost. So we've picked the cards, we drafted the deck, now we're going to play. So let's play, and what are some things to keep in mind when you play the limited format? So first off, you want to mulligan for lands. That is one thing that I've really found is that I prioritize my lands when I pick. When I have my opening hand and I only have 2 lands in there, I will 9 out of 10 mulligan that unless I have like a 1 or 2 mana rock in there, like creature. Otherwise, I will probably mulligan that. Also, if I play a 2 or 3 color deck and I only have 1 color mana, I will probably mulligan that. You cannot count on drawing into lands because you have so much less resources to get to the colors that you need. You're going to be lucky to draw them. So keep in mind that you want to mulligan for lands. That's really what I tend to do, and that really typically works out pretty good. Also, these basic lands arts are the one from the new one set that's being that's going to be released, so I figured I'd put that out there. Now, also one thing to consider is that limited is a slower format. Drafting is slower. You do not have the opportunity to put together a constructed deck with crazy amount of synergy that's just going to smash your opponent to pieces by turn 4. That's not going to happen. So one thing to consider with that is your opening hand. Your opening hand can be slower. So like by example, this could be your opening hand, and I would be very happy with this opening hand. I've got my 3 lands in 2 different color. I've got 3 mana, like a turn 3 spell. So even if whatever amount of draw or to play, I don't mind either way. I think this hand is pretty good. It's not a perfect hand, but it's a great hand. I would not mulligan this. So be careful with your mulligan decision. So again, mulligan for lands. I've got the lands that I need here to at least get me to turn 3. Very likely I will draw a 4th land by the time I need it. And I can play out my whole hand that way. So keep in mind, don't get too aggressive with the mulligan and think that you need to have a 1 or 2 mana spell. It can be a little slower. Now, knowing that it's a slower format, you can take advantage of that too if you want to go a little bit more aggressive. You might just get under your opponent by knowing that it's a slower format. A lot of people tend to keep hands that are a little slower. They tend to pick a little slower, not really focus too much on 1 or 2 drops. So if you go very aggressive with your playstyle, you might just get under a lot of your opponents. Eventually, you're going to get outvalued, but maybe you have just 1 or 2 bigger bombs. But other than that, you can go really aggressive and mess with your opponent that way. I'm not the best with aggressive strategies when it comes to limited, but I've been caught off guard a couple times, especially by this vampire Synergies and Crimson Vow right now. Also, make them have it. So once you start playing, you'll find that there are a ton of times your opponent has mana open. Again, it's not constructed. You're not always going to have something to play and use up all your lands. That doesn't mean that they have bump spells or combat tricks, if you will. However, it is always good to know what to expect. Knowing what to expect will help. If there's something that you think they might very well have and it can make you lose the game and you can wait instead, that's okay. Take your time. However, make them have it. Don't always wait and let your opponent draw what they need. So some of the things that you can expect, so depending on what your opponent plays. If they play white, expect bump spells, expect indestructible stuff, expect lifelink. Blue, obviously, you can expect a lot of counters. Not a lot of people pick counters high in drafts, but you'll always find a couple people playing counters. And also just things that make your creatures less strong or flash creatures. For black, you can expect removal, you can expect death touch on some creatures. Red, pretty similar to white, just bump stuff. Red, you can also expect first strike, so that can really mess you up if your creature suddenly gets first strike against you. And then with green, green just is anti-flyers and likes to get their stuff really, really big. So green pump spells are some of the biggest ones. And if you have flyers, don't ever think that your opponent doesn't have reach, because they might very well, or just have removal for flyers. So those are some of the things that you can expect depending on who you play against. So some final tips. Again, this is a very quick video, just going over some of the basics that will help you improve your draft. So some final tips. Don't be afraid to audible. What I mean by that is you might have built a deck and you end up playing your first game and it just doesn't go well. Don't be afraid to look back at the cards you didn't put in your deck and see if you can make some changes. Sometimes it only takes a couple cards to make a huge difference. Check tier lists. So if you know you're going to go into a certain set, just check out some tier lists real quick to make sure that you know what cards are actual bombs, what cards just look good but are not. There are plenty of those. And practice. So draftsim.com is a great website. I love that website to just go on. You can also check out the tier list there. This is not sponsored. This is just my opinion. And you can even go on DraftSim and just practice some drafts. The nice thing about that is that you can see with certain picks how the end deck will look, how the end result will look. Because sometimes you might think like, hey, all these picks are great, and then you try to put a deck together and it just doesn't work. So DraftSim is a great way to practice. And if you want to learn more, follow, like, and subscribe. So again, follow me on Twitter. You see the handle right there. Don't forget to hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe. There's going to be more videos like this, just short, sweet, how-to videos, and hopefully they contain some useful nuggets for you to improve your game. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you kick ass in the next draft you have. Excuse the language, but that's why we're here. So enjoy. See you guys later.